March 21st, 2026, 4:47 a.m. Kyiv, Ukraine. 2 hypersonic missiles, Mach 8, terminal dive. 19 seconds to decide, 19 seconds to fire, 19 seconds between a functioning capital city and a crater where a command center used to be. The Patriot crew didn't hesitate. They didn't freeze. They executed the most difficult air defense intercept in the history of modern warfare, twice, within 11 seconds of each other. This is the story of how a single Ukrainian Patriot battery defeated Russia's most feared weapon. Not with luck, with preparation, integration, and nerves that refuse to break. I'm your host at Ukraine Signal, where we analyze the battles that change wars. And this one changed everything we thought we knew about hypersonic missile defense. Let's break it down. To understand what happened over Kyiv that morning, you need to understand what Russia was trying to do and why they believed it would work. Since autumn 2024, Russia had deliberately withheld its Kh-47M2 Kinzhal hypersonic missiles from the Ukrainian theater. The weapon had become a propaganda centerpiece for Moscow, a missile the Kremlin claimed was unstoppable, capable of defeating any Western air defense system. After Ukraine's first confirmed Kinzhal intercept in May 2023, Russia pulled the weapon from regular use. Not because it didn't work, because they couldn't afford the embarrassment of losing another one on camera. For 16 months, Russian strategic planners studied Ukrainian air defense patterns. They mapped radar coverage zones. They analyzed response times from every Patriot engagement recorded by satellite and signals intelligence. They identified gaps, or what they believed were gaps, in sensor coverage during the critical transition between mid-course tracking and terminal phase engagement. The plan that emerged was designated Operation Grom-9, according to signals intelligence later decrypted by Ukrainian military intelligence. It called for a complex multi-axis attack designed to saturate Kyiv's air defenses from 3 directions simultaneously. 6 Kh-101 cruise missiles would be launched from 2 95MS strategic bombers orbiting over the Caspian Sea, approaching Kyiv from the southeast on low-altitude terrain-following profiles. Their job was simple: force Ukrainian NASAMs and Hawk batteries to engage, revealing positions and expending interceptors. 4 Iskander-M quasi-ballistic missiles would launch from positions in Bryansk Oblast, approaching from the northeast on depressed trajectories designed to minimize radar detection time. These would further stress the integrated air defense network, forcing Patriot radars to track multiple threat types simultaneously. And then, the main effort. 2 Kh-47M2 Kinzhal missiles, carried by MiG-31K interceptors flying at 20,000 meters altitude over the southern Caspian, would launch on near-simultaneous trajectories, targeting a suspected Ukrainian military command node in the Sviatoshinsky district of western Kyiv. Russian planners timed the Kinzhal arrivals to coincide with the peak engagement window against the cruise missiles, the moment when they calculated Ukrainian fire control officers would be most overwhelmed, most distracted, most likely to detect the hypersonic threat too late for a successful engagement. It was a textbook saturation attack. Multi-domain, multi-axis, multi-speed. On paper, it was the most sophisticated Russian airstrike of the entire war. Which weapon posed the greatest threat to Kyiv that morning? A. The Kh-101 cruise missiles. B. The Iskander-M ballistic missiles. C. The Kh-47M2 Kinzhal hypersonic missiles. Drop your answer in the comments. But Russia made a critical miscalculation. They planned for the Ukrainian air defense network that existed in 2023. They didn't plan for the one that existed in March 2026. Over the preceding 18 months, Ukrainian air defense had undergone a quiet revolution. It wasn't just about new hardware, though there was plenty of that. It was about integration, fusion, the ability to take sensor data from a dozen different sources, merge it into a single coherent picture, and distribute it to every shooter in the network in real time. At the heart of this transformation was a system Ukrainian operators simply called the Mesh. It wasn't one radar, or one satellite, or one data link. It was all of them, woven together by software developed jointly by Ukrainian engineers and NATO technical advisors over the course of 2025. The Mesh pulled tracking data from NATO's space-based infrared system, SBIRS, a constellation of satellites in geosynchronous and highly elliptical orbits specifically designed to detect the thermal signature of ballistic missile launches. Within seconds of a Kinzhal igniting its solid-fuel rocket motor after separation from the MiG-31K carrier aircraft, SBIRS sensors registered the infrared bloom and transmitted initial trajectory data to a NATO ground station in Germany. That data was relayed through secure communication links to Ukrainian Air Force Command in less than 12 seconds. But SBIRS alone couldn't provide the precision tracking needed for a Patriot engagement. It gave bearing and approximate velocity. What the Patriot battery needed was precise three-dimensional coordinates updated multiple times per second during the terminal phase. That's where Ukraine's own radars came in. A Zoopark-3 counter-battery radar, originally designed to track artillery shells and calculate firing positions, had been modified by Ukrainian engineers with Western-supplied digital signal processors. The modification, completed in late 2025, allowed the radar to detect and track objects moving at hypersonic velocities in the upper atmosphere. It couldn't do it at extreme range, but within 120 kilometers, it could generate a track accurate enough to cue a Patriot engagement radar. Supporting the Zoopark was a P-18 Terek early warning radar, a Soviet-era VHF system that Ukrainian forces had extensively modernized. New solid-state transmitters replaced the original vacuum tubes. A digital receiver backend provided through a classified European Defense Cooperation Program gave the aging radar the ability to detect low observable targets, and more importantly, to hand off tracks to the Patriot's AN/MPQ-65A engagement radar with sufficient accuracy for immediate lock-on. Stay with me, because what happens in the next 19 seconds rewrites the textbook on hypersonic missile defense. 4:31 a.m., the opening moves. 6 Kh-101 cruise missiles crossed into Ukrainian airspace from the southeast, flying at approximately 50 meters altitude, hugging terrain features to minimize radar cross-section. Ukrainian early warning radars detected the incoming salvo at a range of approximately 180 kilometers. Air Defense Command immediately activated pre-planned response protocols. 2 Ukrainian F-16AM fighters, part of a combat air patrol orbiting west of Kyiv, received intercept vectors from ground control. Each aircraft carried 4 AIM-120C7AM RAAM missiles. They turned southeast and descended to intercept altitude. Simultaneously, 2 NASAMS batteries covering the southern and eastern approaches to Kyiv came to full alert. Their crews had drilled this exact scenario hundreds of times. Kh-101 cruise missiles were a known threat, with well-characterized radar signatures and predictable flight profiles. The NASAMS crews were confident. 4:34 a.m. The Iskander-M launches registered on Ukrainian radar screens. 4 missiles launched from mobile TELs in Bryansk Oblast, arcing upward on semi-ballistic trajectories. Their time to target, approximately 6 minutes. Now, the Ukrainian air defense picture became complex. Cruise missiles from the south, ballistic missiles from the northeast, different speeds, different altitudes, different engagement requirements. This was exactly what Russian planners wanted. Complexity, overload, confusion. But the Ukrainian Integrated Air Defense Command Center didn't experience confusion. They experienced a scenario they had wargamed 17 times in the preceding 4 months. Each threat was assigned to the appropriate weapon system through pre-planned engagement zones. NASAMS and F-16S would handle the cruise missiles. A Patriot PAC-2 battery would track and engage the Iskanders. And the PAC-3 MSE battery, the most advanced air defense asset in Ukraine, remained on standby, reserved for the threat that hadn't appeared yet, but that everyone knew was coming. 4:38 a.m., the F-16S engaged. The lead pilot, call sign Carpathian, locked and fired 2 AIM-120C7S at a range of 48 kilometers against the leading pair of Kh-101S. The missiles tracked true. 2 Kh-101S disintegrated over open farmland east of Borispil. 30 seconds later, the NASAMS batteries opened fire. AMRAAM-RR missiles streaked upward from their launchers, each one guided by the battery's Sentinel radar. 3 more Kh-101s fell in rapid succession. The 6th cruise missile altered course, its pre-programmed evasion routine activating, and temporarily dropped below radar coverage behind a ridgeline. It would be reacquired and destroyed by the second F-16 4 minutes later. 5 of 6 cruise missiles down. The outer ring of the Russian attack was collapsing. 4:41 a.m. The Patriot PAC-3 battery engaged the Iskander-M salvo. Iskander-M missiles are quasi-ballistic. They don't follow a clean parabolic arc like a traditional ballistic missile. Instead, they perform evasive maneuvers during terminal phase, pulling up to 30 G-turns designed to defeat interceptors. But the PAC-2's engagement radar had been tracking them since they crested the horizon, and the fire control solution was solid. 3 of 4 Iskanders were intercepted. The fourth, whether through a guidance malfunction or a deliberate trajectory shift, struck an abandoned industrial compound on the eastern outskirts of Kyiv. The explosion shattered windows within a 400-meter radius. But the buildings had been evacuated months earlier as part of Kyiv's civilian protection protocols. No casualties. 4:43 a.m. The integrated sensor network registered 2 new contacts, and everything changed. The first detection came from SBIRS, 2 infrared signatures consistent with solid-fuel rocket motors at high altitude, bearing south-southeast from the Caspian Sea region. Velocity, accelerating through Mach 6 and climbing. 12 seconds later, the modernized P-18 radar acquired both contacts at a range of 310 kilometers. Track quality was marginal. The targets were small, fast, and descending, but sufficient to generate a preliminary vector. The Zoopark-3 radar, positioned 40 kilometers south of Kyiv, picked up the contacts 8 seconds after that. Now, track quality improved dramatically. The digital signal processors locked onto both targets with sub-second update rates, feeding precise azimuth, elevation, and velocity data directly into the mesh. The mesh correlated all 3 data sources, SBIRS, P-18, and Zoopark, and generated a fused track that was transmitted to the PAC-3 MSE battery's AN/MPQ-65A radar. The Patriot's own radar acquired both targets within 3 seconds of receiving the cue. Time was now measured in heartbeats. The Kinzhal, officially designated Kh-47M2, is an air-launched ballistic missile derived from the Iskander-M ground system, but carried to launch altitude and speed by a MiG-31K interceptor aircraft. Released at Mach 2.3 and 20,000 meters altitude, the missile's solid-fuel motor accelerates it to speeds exceeding Mach 10 during its boost phase. During terminal approach, atmospheric drag slows it to approximately Mach 8, still fast enough to cross 10 kilometers in less than 4 seconds. The missile carries a 500-kilogram warhead. At Mach 8, the kinetic energy alone is devastating. A direct hit on a hardened structure would penetrate multiple floors of reinforced concrete before detonation. Against an unhardened target, an office building, an apartment complex, a command post, and a converted school, the result would be total destruction within a radius of 50 to 80 meters, with lethal fragmentation extending much further. Russia had fired Kinzhals at Ukraine before. The first confirmed use was in March 2022 against an underground weapons depot in Ivano-Frankivsk Oblast. In May 2023, a Patriot battery in Kyiv intercepted a Kinzhal for the first time, a moment that shattered Moscow's narrative of the weapon's invincibility. But subsequent engagements had proven difficult. The engagement window was razor-thin. The margin for error was essentially zero. How many total missiles did Russia fire at Kyiv during this March 21st attack? A8, B12, C16? The answer comes at the end. 4:44:07 a.m. This is the moment. The PAC-3 MSE battery commander, a Ukrainian lieutenant colonel whose identity remains classified, but whom President Zelensky would later refer to by his call sign, SHIT, meaning shield, stared at his tactical display. 2 red tracks converging on Kyiv from the south-southeast. Velocity readout, Mach 8.2. Altitude, 38 kilometers and descending rapidly. Time to impact of the first missile, 23 seconds. But time to impact isn't the same as engagement time. The Patriot system needs several seconds to compute a fire control solution, verify the track, and transmit guidance commands to the interceptor missile. The PAC-3 MSE interceptor itself, a hit-to-kill weapon that destroys its target through direct kinetic impact, not a proximity-fused warhead, needs flight time to reach the intercept point. Against a target descending at Mach 8, the interceptor must launch with enough time to climb to altitude and position itself in the missile's flight path. Lieutenant Colonel Schitt had 19 seconds from confirmed track to the last possible moment for launch authorization. 19 seconds. The electronic warfare environment made it worse. A Russian Il-22 Porubchik, a specialized electronic warfare aircraft based on the Il-22 airframe, carrying the Porubchik wideband jamming system, was orbiting over Bryansk Oblast, pumping high-power noise, jamming across the frequency bands used by Ukrainian air defense radars. The jamming didn't blind the Patriot's radar entirely. The AN/MPQ-65A is designed to operate in contested electromagnetic environments, but it degraded track quality and forced the fire control computer to work harder to maintain lock. The battery's electronic warfare officer reported degraded signal-to-noise ratio. The track was valid but noisy. The fire control solution was within acceptable parameters. Barely. Subscribe to Ukraine Signal if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, because what this crew did next belongs in every military academy curriculum on Earth. Schitt made his decision in under 2 seconds. He authorized a 2-round salvo against the first Kinzhal. Standard doctrine against a hypersonic ballistic target: fire 2 interceptors on slightly offset trajectories to maximize probability of kill. He simultaneously designated the second Kinzhal for engagement and ordered a single-round initial salvo with a second interceptor on standby. 4:44 and 12 seconds AM, 2 PAC-3 MSE interceptors erupted from their canisters. The launch signatures, brilliant white rocket plumes against the dark pre-dawn sky, were visible from residential buildings across western Kyiv. Residents who were awake, unable to sleep through the air raid sirens that had been wailing since 4:30, saw the streaks of light climbing at impossible speed. The PAC-3 MSE interceptor is a remarkable piece of engineering. Weighing approximately 312 kilograms, it is propelled by a solid-fuel rocket motor that accelerates it to speeds exceeding Mach 5. Unlike earlier Patriot variants that used blast fragmentation warheads detonating near the target, the MSE is a hit-to-kill weapon. It must physically collide with the incoming missile. At closing speeds potentially exceeding Mach 13, the combined velocity of interceptor and target, the impact releases kinetic energy equivalent to several hundred kilograms of high explosive. There is no room for near misses. It hits or it doesn't. The MSE achieves this precision through a combination of radar guidance from the ground-based AN/MPQ-65A radar and its own onboard K-band active radar seeker, which activates during the terminal phase of the intercept. In the final seconds, the interceptor's seeker locks onto the target independently, making micro-corrections with its attitude control thrusters, small solid-fuel rockets arranged around the interceptor's body, to steer directly into the target's flight path. The first Kinzhal was now at 22 kilometers altitude, descending at approximately 2,700 meters per second. The 2 PAC-3 MSE interceptors climbed to meet it, 4:44:18 AM. The lead interceptor's onboard seeker activated. It detected the Kinzhal's radar signature, a small, hot, incredibly fast object plunging through the upper atmosphere. The seeker locked on. Guidance commands from the ground station merged with the interceptor's own tracking data. Correction burns fired. The interceptor adjusted its trajectory by fractions of a degree. 4:44:19 AM impact. The first PAC-3 MSE interceptor struck the Kinzhal at approximately 15 kilometers altitude. The collision, 2 objects meeting at a combined velocity exceeding Mach 12, produced a blinding flash that was recorded by at least 4 civilian webcams across Kyiv and 2 Ukrainian military observation posts. The Kinzhal's 500-kilogram warhead detonated sympathetically from the impact energy, creating a secondary fireball that expanded and faded over the course of approximately 2 seconds. Debris from the destroyed Kinzhal began falling over unpopulated agricultural land southeast of Kyiv. The second interceptor, finding no target, executed its self-destruct sequence 9 seconds after launch. 1 Kinzhal down, 1 to go. The second Kinzhal arrived 11 seconds later. Russian planners had deliberately staggered the 2 missiles, close enough to create simultaneous stress on the defense system, far enough apart that an engagement against the first wouldn't automatically provide a solution for the second. The second missile's trajectory was offset by approximately 1.3 degrees, a small angular difference at launch that translated into a lateral separation of several kilometers at terminal phase. The Patriot's fire control computer had been tracking both missiles simultaneously. When Schiet authorized the engagement against the first Kinzhal, the system had already computed a preliminary solution for the second. But the track on the second missile was noisier. The Russian Il-22pp's jamming was now focused more heavily on the Patriot's radar frequency, and the second Kinzhal was approaching from a slightly different angle relative to the radar's bore sight. The electronic warfare officer called out interference levels. They were at the threshold of acceptable performance. The fire control officer reported the solution was valid, but with lower confidence. The backup interceptor was loaded and ready. If you believe tactics win wars, type Ukraine signal in the comments. Because what happened next proves it. Schiet didn't wait. He couldn't. At Mach 8, every second of hesitation meant the Kinzhal dropped 3 kilometers closer to Kyiv. He authorized the single-round engagement. 4:44:27 a.m. 1 PAC-3 MSE launched against the second Kinzhal. This engagement was harder. The interceptor climbed into the jamming environment, its data link with the ground radar experiencing brief dropouts. The onboard seeker activated earlier than ideal, extending its search cone to compensate for the degraded ground-based guidance. 4:44:30 a.m. The interceptor's seeker acquired the second Kinzhal. At this point, the missile was at approximately 11 kilometers altitude, descending at Mach 7.8. The interceptor was climbing at Mach 4.9. Closing speed, approximately Mach 12.7. The interceptor's attitude control thrusters fired a rapid series of corrections. The onboard guidance computer processed seeker data at thousands of updates per second, calculating the precise point in space where the two objects would converge. 4:44:31 a.m. impact, 9 kilometers altitude. The second Kinzhal disintegrated. The flash was smaller than the first, a function of the lower altitude and the angle of observation. But it was recorded by multiple cameras and confirmed by radar track termination. The lowest successful Kinzhal intercept ever recorded, 9 kilometers. The missile was approximately 3 seconds from striking western Kyiv. 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, the warhead would have covered approximately 8 kilometers. It would have impacted in a densely populated residential area during the early morning hours. The 500-kilogram warhead, combined with the kinetic energy of a Mach 7.8 impact, would have created a blast crater approximately 15 meters in diameter and destroyed or severely damaged every structure within a 100-meter radius. The Patriot crew prevented that with a single missile. The air raid continued for another 14 minutes as remaining threats were tracked, engaged, and cleared. The 6th Kh-101 was destroyed by the trailing F-16 at 4:47 a.m. By 4:58 a.m., Ukrainian Air Force Command declared the airspace clear. Total Russian salvo: 12 missiles, 11 intercepted. 1 Iskander-M impacted and evacuated industrial zone. 0 civilian casualties. 0 military casualties. 0 damage to any critical infrastructure. Total cost of the Russian attack, estimated at $180 to $220 million in munitions alone. Each Kinzhal is estimated to cost between $10 and $15 million. Each Kh-101 costs approximately $13 million. Each Iskander-M costs approximately $3 to $5 million. Add the operational costs of the Tu-95MS bomber sorties, the MiG-31K interceptor flights, the Il-22pp electronic warfare support, and tanker aircraft for aerial refueling, and the total cost of Operation Grom-9 likely exceeded $250 million. The result: one hole in an empty factory. That was all Russia achieved. What would NATO have done differently in this scenario? Would a different layered defense architecture have performed better? Drop your analysis in the comments. Later that morning, as the sun rose over Kyiv and residents emerged from shelters, the scale of what had happened began to sink in. The Patriot battery crew had executed 2 hypersonic intercepts in under 20 seconds, under electronic warfare conditions, against the weapon Russia claimed was invincible. They had done it with 3 interceptor missiles, expending only 3 rounds from their limited supply to destroy 2 of the most expensive and technically advanced weapons in Russia's arsenal. Ukrainian General Staff released a statement at 9 a.m. confirming the intercepts and providing initial battle damage assessment. The statement was unusually detailed, clearly intended to maximize the psychological impact on both domestic and international audiences. Satellite imagery from commercial providers, analyzed by OSINT investigators within hours, corroborated the Ukrainian claims. 2 distinct debris fields were identified southeast of Kyiv, consistent with aerial intercepts at the altitudes reported by Ukrainian authorities. Spectral analysis of the debris signatures matched known characteristics of Kinzhal missile components. Intercepted Russian communications, released by Ukrainian military intelligence later that week, revealed the impact within Russia's Strategic Aviation Command. One exchange between a Tu-95MS crew and their ground controller, recorded approximately 30 minutes after the failed strike, included the phrase, translated from Russian, "Both packages failed to deliver." The controller responded with a long pause, followed by instructions to return to base and maintain radio silence. A more damning exchange was intercepted between 2 Russian Air Force officers discussing the operation's failure. One officer stated that the integration problem has been solved, an apparent reference to Ukraine's ability to fuse multiple sensor sources for hypersonic tracking. The other responded that, "We need to find a different approach and that the current delivery method is compromised." For Russia, Operation Grom-9 was a strategic catastrophe, not because of the material losses, though $250 million in munitions is significant even for Russia's wartime economy. The catastrophe was informational. The Kinzhal's aura of invincibility, carefully constructed through years of propaganda and selective deployment, was shattered conclusively and publicly. After the May 2023 intercept, Russia could argue it was an anomaly, a lucky shot, a technical malfunction in the Kinzhal, an exaggeration by Ukrainian authorities. After March 21, 2026, there was no such argument available. 2 Kinzhals, fired under optimal conditions as part of a carefully planned saturation attack with extensive electronic warfare support, had both been destroyed by a single Patriot battery. The implications rippled outward immediately. Western defense analysts who had long debated the feasibility of defending against hypersonic weapons pointed to the intercept as proof of concept for integrated sensor-to-shooter networks. A senior analyst at the Royal United Services Institute in London noted that the Kyiv engagement demonstrates that hypersonic speed alone does not guarantee penetration when the defender possesses adequate sensor fusion and correctly positioned interceptors. The Atlantic Council published a rapid assessment paper within 48 hours, arguing that the intercept validated NATO's investment in integrated air and missile defense architecture. The paper specifically highlighted the role of SBIRS queuing, space-based detection feeding trajectory data to ground-based radars feeding engagement solutions to the Patriot battery, as the key enabler. In Kyiv, the reaction was immediate and emotional. President Zelensky's evening address on March 21st included an extraordinary passage in which he thanked the Patriot battery crew by call sign. Today, Zelensky said, Lieutenant Colonel Schitt and his team proved that Ukrainian courage, combined with the support of our partners, can defeat any weapon our enemy possesses. They are the shield of Kyiv. They are the shield of Ukraine. The statement was significant for several reasons. Ukrainian operational security typically prevents public identification of air defense crews, even by call sign. Zelensky's decision to break that convention signaled the extraordinary importance his government placed on the psychological and strategic dimensions of the intercept. It was a message to multiple audiences simultaneously, to the Ukrainian public that they were protected, to Western allies that their weapons were being used to devastating effect, and to Moscow that Russia's most advanced weapons could not break Ukraine's defenses. Real tactics, real consequences. Ukraine's signal. The crew of the Patriot battery, whose full composition remains classified, reportedly consists of Ukrainian soldiers who completed an intensive training program at Fort Sill, Oklahoma in 2023, followed by additional advanced training with U.S. Army instructors in Germany throughout 2024. By March 2026, the crew had accumulated more than 2 years of continuous combat experience operating the Patriot system against live threats, an experience level that no other Patriot crew in the world possesses. That experience matters. The Patriot system is extraordinarily complex, and its effectiveness depends as much on crew proficiency as on hardware capability. The decision to fire, the timing of launch, the management of the engagement radar under jamming conditions, These are human decisions made under inhuman time pressure. The 19-second window that Lieutenant Colonel Schitt faced was not just a test of the Patriot system. It was a test of a human being's ability to process information, assess risk, and act decisively when the consequences of failure were measured in civilian lives. He passed that test. His entire crew passed that test. And that is perhaps the most important lesson of March 21st. Technology matters. Sensors matter. Integration matters. But in the final 19 seconds, what matters most is the person sitting at the console. Now let me give you the answer to the question I asked earlier. How many total missiles did Russia fire at Kyiv during this attack? The answer is B, 12. 6 Kh-101 cruise missiles, 4 Iskander-M ballistic missiles, and 2 Kh-47M2 Kinzhal hypersonic missiles. 12 missiles, total value exceeding $180 million, launched as part of a coordinated saturation attack designed to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses. 11 were intercepted. The 12th hit an empty building. 0 casualties. 3 questions to consider. Was Lieutenant Colonel Schitt's decision to fire only a single interceptor at the second Kinzhal the right call? He had a backup round loaded and ready. Doctrine called for a 2-round salvo. But interceptor supplies are finite, and every round expended against a Kinzhal is a round unavailable for the next attack. He gambled on one shot, and he was right. But was the risk justified? Could Russia have designed Operation Grom-9 differently to succeed? Was the saturation concept fundamentally sound, but poorly timed? Or was the entire approach flawed, given Ukraine's integrated sensor network? What would it take for Russia to actually penetrate Kyiv's air defenses with the assets currently in its arsenal? And what would you have done differently? If you were commanding that Patriot battery with 19 seconds on the clock and electronic jamming degrading your radar, would you have fired earlier? Later? Used more interceptors? Made the same call? Subscribe to Ukraine Signal, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. Real tactics. Real consequences. Ukraine Signal. The skies over Kyiv are quiet now. The sirens have stopped. The shelters are empty. Somewhere on the outskirts of the city, a Patriot battery crew is running system checks, replacing expended canisters, and preparing for the next alert. They know it will come. Russia will try again. Different tactics, different timing, maybe different weapons, but the crew will be ready. Because in modern warfare, 19 seconds is enough if you've spent 2 years preparing for them. The wreckage of 2 Kinzhal missiles lies scattered across farmland southeast of Kyiv. Fragments of what Russia called invincible, smoldering in Ukrainian soil. Silent reminders that modern warfare punishes overconfidence without mercy. Stay vigilant.